And boom, we're live. David, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
We made it happen.
Fun to be in Park Slope.
Yeah.
A little education for me.
So as I told you before, I like to get things started with a little tidbit or a story about yourself that the world doesn't know from what's already out there.
Okay. Since you know, or I think you know my origin in nightlife story, I was the best Jewish quarterback at Tufts University in 1983. We won the school intramural championship, and I think I might have taken more pride in that than 4 years of varsity lacrosse.
Wow!
Because we beat all these teams that everyone said they have no shot, and we managed to do it.
That's a proud moment. Yeah, I was not expecting that.
I could throw the ball. I'm not very fast, but I could throw the ball.
How's your arm now?
Still good. We just can't find a field to play. It's once they redid the Great Lawn, they wouldn't let us play there anymore. So it's a shame. I want to play with Ty, my son, because he's, as you know how big he is now. I want to play with him.
He's huge.
He's huge.
So, also, so for people that don't know, we want to give a little bit of background on you, and we talked about it a couple minutes ago. I want to let you kind of take it away on how you got into the restaurant nightlife business, because I think it's a fascinating story, and I think it's better to hear it from you than from me.
It's quite accidental, to be honest. I mean, we were very social always. My house at Tufts was sort of known as the house that had the best party every year to kick the school year off. I live with 5 other guys, all of whom are literally doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs kind of thing now. But we all sort of ran around campus and were very social. We used to have this amazing kickoff party. And, then I did what you're supposed to do. I went to law school. I hated every second of it. Thought about trying to go to Harvard Business School. Took classes up there and realized people had 7, 8 years of real work experience. And I was like, whoa, I don't know anything. And I happened to run into my valedictorian for my class at Tufts, who was the smartest kid I'd ever met in my life. And I ran into him in Cambridge, and I said, "Hey, Steve, how's it going?" And he's like, "Wow, it's so hard." I was like, "Whoa." Last thing I expected to hear from him. So, kind of went back, finished law school, joined a firm, sort of a prominent real estate firm in New York, small but well-regarded, small by New York standards, 100-something lawyers. And I really think I got the job because I could play shortstop, honestly, on the summer softball team. And it's going along fine. And then this young guy showed up at the office one day, and after hours, and I was on a floor that had an annex floor, so I had to let him in. And young, handsome black guy, maybe 20 years old. I was all of 26 or something, or 27, and he had on his jacket. It said Warner Brothers, and it said, "I'll be sure." And I, for whatever reason, instead of doing, "Hi, how can I help you?" I said, "Come on, man, your mom didn't name you Al B. Sure." And he laughed, and I laughed. I had no idea who he was. And when he left, I went to the partner, and I said, "Who was that guy?" He goes, "He's about to drop an album, be Sony's Artist of the Year." And I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "I'll do it. I'll work weekends." And the guy the partner at the time was my age now, approximately, had 3 young kids. He was like, "I can't go to the Apollo, you go." So I just accidentally started getting sent to all these amazing events as Al's lawyer, even though I didn't know what I was doing. And I was honest with Al about that. Like, I need help here. But he's a kind of a one-hit wonder. He's a wonderful guy. He's now, I believe, he's a radio DJ, a very prominent one in L.A. But it started putting me back in a social circle that I really didn't even, it was the kind of thing you read about. I mean, I was always going to clubs sort of to have a social life, but I wasn't in the VIP section. I was just one of the people in these clubs. But because of Al, I started getting invited to all these events, and I kept running into a guy I had gone to Tufts with who was, I wouldn't say my best friend in terms of like the 5 or 6 guys I spent every day with, but one of the people I was most fond of. And, we used to see each other all the time in the dining room or all the time in, there's a place called Jay's Deli in Medford that we used to eat all our meals in. And Will was was literally the handsomest guy on the planet. And, he just always had the most beautiful girlfriend and whatever. But he went through like a series of these girlfriends who were all kind of blonde and cute and yacht kind of girls. And, they would, girls who has families, had homes in New England and one day I ran into on Columbus Avenue. I was literally doing my laundry in a laundromat, and I'm like dressed kind of like this in sweats. And Will's like, "Hey, Davey," and he's one of like 3 people on the planet who call me Davey. So I knew who it was, and I turn around and he says, "Come here, I want you to be my new girlfriend." So I'm kind of going to meet Molly or Muffy or whatever it's going to be. And I walk in, and there in all her glory is Iman, who at the time was the most famous model in the world. It was before she married David Bowie. And I literally, my jaw dropped. I was like, I tried not to show how but I was like, what? Because it was so unexpected. And this was his serious girlfriend, the most famous model in the world at the time. And they started inviting me to all these events with them. And we were going to whatever the club of the moment was. And it was quite the life, because all her friends were literally Calvin Klein or, so I got exposed to this world at a very, very high level. And I realized I knew a lot of these people from the music industry, but Will's side of it was much more fashion. And that was, in New York, at least at that time, nightlife was really driven by fashion. And whereas in LA, it's driven by, Hollywood. There's a lot more crossover now. And now I think athletes have changed the way they perceive themselves and the way the public perceives them. So, now having a Russell Westbrook come into your spot or LeBron is a huge deal. It wasn't really like that at the high end of nightlife at that time in the 80s. It was much more important to have the supermodels. So Will and I started going out again together, and we were in Nell's one night, which was sort of the most famous club of that time by far. And I kind of said, "God, I fucking hate my job." And he's like, "Yeah, I fucking hate my job." And, he was on Wall Street. He was a derivatives trader. He was doing really well, but his dad was dying of cancer, and he was sort of having this existential crisis of, like, really, is this what I'm going to do the rest of my life? I'm 40 more years of going to work and hating my job. And I was going through the same thing about law. I mean, I didn't have the family issues, but I was just like, really, this is what I got all A's for, so I could read 1,000-page leases and get yelled at. And, we were a little bit cocky, had a couple of shots of tequila in us, and we sort of like half jokingly said, let's fuck this. Let's open a nightclub. We know all these people. We literally looked at the room, and, it was this table of models, and, although his name is now not great, but there was Russell Simmons, and we knew Russell, and a guy named Jelly Bean Benitez, who was a huge producer and had been Madonna's boyfriend. And it was at that moment, anyone who was culturally relevant in New York was in the room, and we knew them all. And we sort of had a party to see to test our insanity, and they all showed up, and we were kind of like, we could do this. And I think, look, it's the privilege of, I had a law degree from Columbia, and he was a star trader. I think we had the confidence that, look, if everything went terribly 2 years from then, we could just go get jobs, like suck it up and be like, okay, I'm going to go be a lawyer again. This sucks. So I quit my job. He quit his. He spent 6 months really kind of trying to bond with his dad, play as much golf as they could, and really, because his dad sort of knew, I'm going to die X time from now. And so Will spent a great deal of time with his dad. And I moved to Phoenix. There was no phrase at the time, FOMO, but I wanted to go somewhere. That was my thing. Was at the time I was very busy as a lawyer. I was very involved with New York Cares as a volunteer to sort of save my soul, if you will. And I was running around at night trying to have a social life in New York. I was a single guy in New York, organizing dinner parties and all this stuff. And I wanted to just like take a step back and go somewhere where I didn't think I'd be missing anything. And I wanted to read and work out. So basically I looked at a map and I said, where is it warm from sort of October to December? And I went for 3 months, and no phone, no TV. And, this is pre-cell phone era. So I lived in a housing complex that I lived in a little 1-bedroom. It had tennis courts and a pool. And I bought 30 books that I felt like I always should have read and hadn't. And I read about 10 hours a day, and I played 2 hours of tennis a day. And that was kind of it. And only 2 people had my phone number, my mom, or the phone number of the hallway. There was like a payphone. And so if they needed to reach me, my mom and Will, my partner.
And how old are you at the time?
28. And Will would call me up like every 2 weeks, say, "You're sure you're coming back?" Because he kind of made a big bet that I was going to come back and not just decide to move to Phoenix. And I said, "Yeah, no, I'm definitely coming back." And I was really lucky. I had a friend at the time work for the NFL. I went from Phoenix to Miami, saw the amazing Joe Montana come back against the Bengals with friends from college, and then came back to New York and worked part-time as a lawyer while we raised money and built out our first place.
And then, talk to me like a little bit about the development of. You're referring to Lotus as the.
No, the first place was called Rex.
Okay, the first was Rex.
And it was we opened in the summer of 1990. Shitty little townhouse on 6th Avenue. For a lot of years, I couldn't even look at it. Like, it was just so painful because we did everything wrong in terms of understanding how to make money at this business. And, it was pre-bottle service. Had it been a bottle service era, we would have been fine. The biggest problem with Rex was, at the time, clubs in New York were big. There was Palladium and Limelight. So you'd have these 3,000-person clubs, and they'd have small VIP rooms where everything was comped. We built the VIP room, but we forgot the big club, if you will. So we had a room that was filled with everyone who was somebody, which was fun and exciting and why we sort of got on the map. But those people don't pay cover. They always get a comp drink, et cetera. So the one thing we did right was, just by happenstance, the same young women who were Iman and Will's close friends when I started running into them, now they had become the most famous girls on the planet. Literally, it was Linda Evangelista, Cindy Crawford, Christy Turlington, Naomi Campbell. They weren't really my friends. I mean, I have a rapport with them. If I run into them, they're very nice with me. But they were really Will's closest friends. So you open a nightclub and that's your base customer. Word gets out, And so, next thing you know, every sort of wealthy guy in New York, every celebrity was rolling through Rex to see what exactly was going on. And we had a secret weapon. There's a woman, she lives in London now. Her name's Elizabeth Saltzman, fantastic person. And she was an editor at that time at Vogue, and younger than us even. And she lived nearby Rex, and she sort of made it her last stop every night. And Elizabeth was always out. She did the covers for these magazines, so she was always out with and not romantically, business stuff, but she's an incredibly charismatic woman. She was always out with Warren Beatty, Richard Gere, Mick Jagger, and she'd just roll in, and on a nightly basis, she'd roll in with someone who's world famous. And I'm 6 months away from having been a real estate lawyer, so I'm completely shocked all the time. Will was a little chiller about it. I'm like, holy shit, Mick Jagger just walked in. I'm just stunned. So, that was the first one. It went okay. The good news about it was it led to a lot of other people trying to hire us to do shit. We sort of had made a mark of wow, these guys have the best crowd in New York. No one really asked us, were you making money or not? Because we weren't. But they were all very impressed that we were able to draw this crowd. So 3 or 4 groups were trying to do something with us at the time. And we worked with a couple of them and then eventually ended up in sort of an insane way in Moscow instead of in New York.
Right. So then the big, Tyler's a good friend of mine. He talked about the Russia and the Moscow stories, or some that I do not know yet. But just for a little bit of background, so it was a Western style supper club is what they referred to, that you started, I think, in 93.
Yes. So in 1992, we sold Rex. It was a very bad learning lessons for me about the media. Someone leaked the sale just before it was to be sold, and it caused the buyer very astutely, but in a very Machiavellian way, to reduce the price. And there aren't a lot of buyers. Once word gets out that something's for sale, kind of blood gets in the water, and so I don't want to digress too much, but the short answer is that we weren't able to sell Rex for what we thought we could. So we were completely, sort of psychologically decimated. And I went to LA to visit one of my closest friends who had a club out there called Roxbury. Still one of my best friends. Amazing guy named Brad Johnson. Roxbury, there's a movie, Night at the Roxbury. It was a real place. So I went out there to hang out with him for 10 days and get my shit together. And I got this phone call or a message, I guess, thinking about it. Random, like 5 people removed. Someone that knew me from law school said that my cousin wants to open a nightclub in Moscow and they want to meet you. But I was an IR and poli-sci major at Tufts. So I was interested enough to at least go to the meeting. And it was at 712 Fifth Avenue. I remember because it was such a spectacular building and so not what we expected. And we walked into these palatial offices of this Russian import-export business and bank, and we were like, "What the fuck is going on?" And so we sat across from these guys, and they were very stoic. There was one American-born but Russian background young guy there. Again, here we are. We're 32 or something, 31. He might have been 28. He did most of the talking for these 2 very stoic Russian guys who barely spoke English. Sort of laid out his pitch of what he wanted to do, and they wanted to create the first Western nightclub in Moscow. They wanted us to run it. They were going to hire the guys who had designed Studio 54 to design it, the actual guys. And would we do it? And we talked a little about it. We said, yeah, sure, let's go we don't know, but let's go look. And they said, okay. And they left the room, and we Will and I kind of looked at each other. And, we've known each other since 18, so we're really, like, as close to brothers as, And we're like, wow, we fucked that up. I don't know. They don't like us because they never smiled. And they came back in 10 minutes later and put papers in front of us and with visa documents to fill out. And 5 days later, we were in Moscow looking at the site and sort of trying to learn what was going on in Russia at the time.
What's going on in your head through like all of this? And
that point, pure excitement. I mean, look, like, this was the evil empire, right? And it's only 2 years later, and my biggest paper in college was about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how the story was told by 3 different, by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and I forget the third periodical. But, so I was very immersed in sort of Russian history and U.S. Russian history. And so for me, it was like, holy shit, this is completely fascinating, And of course, Will is so fucking insane and so different than me that, like, we're walking through Red Square and we realize we're looking at the chopping blocks where they used to literally cut people's heads off. And he like gives me the camera and puts his head down on one and like says, take a picture. And I'm like, and we see guards coming from we're literally sprinting out of Red Square back to our hotel. Narrowly escaped, drank way too much. Like, I'm not that drinker, and we were just in shock at how much the Russians drank at all times. Back then, I don't know what's going on now, but I mean, no matter what you said, it was like, oh, we must toast that. So it was kind of nightmarish on that level.
So you get there 5 days later. And then what's the process like there? Are you working with
Took
the
a while.
developers?
Yeah, we flew over with, it's kind of funny, we flew over not realizing it with the 2 designers. They were on the same flight, and I said to Will, because there were these 2 well-dressed, sort of nice-looking guys, and I said, those guys have to be the architects and designers. And he's like, fuck you, you're crazy. When we land, sure enough, it's them. And so we get to know them over a couple of days. They're great guys. And on like the 3rd or 4th night, I say, hey, it's funny, on the plane, I said to Will, these guys, and he goes, nah, they're just 2 gay guys checking us out. And they laughed, and they go, oh, we thought the same thing about you. So anyway, we became great friends with them. It took a long time. I would say it took a year. And in the interim, the club changed hands. It was sold from one group to another, so which is part of what slowed it down. But it took a long time from when our first meeting till we really started construction. And construction was really slow. We hired an American who had been my camper when I was a tennis counselor in camp. When I was 18, he was 12. He now was 24, 25. Michael decided, a young guy named Michael, to move to Moscow with us, but he was going to live there. We were supposed to rotate, Will and I. Michael and a chef named Steve were going to live there all for 2 years. Michael, kind of for the sense of adventure. Steve was a little different. He was a chef, and he was recently married, and he was like, he could live for free and bank all his salary for 2 years and come back and buy a house and like have a life. And get ahead in a way you couldn't get it. And that's what most expats, we sort of miscalculated, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we thought that a big part of our clientele in Russia was going to be expats who just were craving American food and American music. And turned out that most expats were really trying to live as lean as possible. Their housing was paid for by their company. They were trying to bank as much money as they could so they could come back and like take that step up, get that better apartment or get that house in New Jersey they always wanted. So they really weren't looking to go drop $200 at dinner. It was all, our customer base was much more the young oligarchs. We didn't, that phrase wasn't really in use at the time, but the people you would think of as oligarchs today were 28, 29, hustling in Russia, and that was really our base client.
What are your parents thinking at the time?
You know, I have to give my parents a lot of credit because, you know, basically I fulfilled what they asked of me. You know, my dad was, when I really wanted to leave law school, my dad was like, look, you're in an Ivy League law school. It will open up every door for you. You'll always have options. Just get through it. And so when I announced that I was leaving and going to Phoenix, you know, everyone thought like, oh my God, your parents are good. They were so cool about it. They were like, you know, look, 28, you did everything we asked, every grade we ever wanted from you, you got, you know, every award, you know, if you need this time, great. I did not tell them a lot of the stuff that was really going on in Russia. In fact, and again, I'm jumping ahead, but the club was bombed at one point by a rival mafia. And, you know, at that point, I'd been living in Russia for so long, or staying in Russia for so that I didn't even really flinch. I was in bed. It was a Sunday morning. I heard an explosion. We lived in a hotel suite about 18 floors above the nightclub. And I heard this giant explosion. But to be honest, I just rolled over and went back to sleep because so much shit went on every day in Moscow. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. Someone blew up a car. Like, you know, you just kind of got used to it. I had so the phone rings in my suite like 2 minutes later. And it's Tanya, who was sort of our Uber mom in Russia. This woman, she was probably only 10 years older than me, but she felt like she was my Russian mom. And she's like, David, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm asleep. She goes, she's like, but didn't you hear that explosion? I'm like, yeah, of course I heard it. She goes, that was the club. So I throw on sweats. I go downstairs, and there's KGB or FSB, whatever, everywhere. And they had blown up about a quarter of the club. Now, of course, within about a week's time, the rumor was that the whole club was blown up. The whole building was blown up. We were all blown to death. You know, I remember being in a supermarket and people coming up and like hugging me because they thought we had been all killed. But my sister was due to come that week to visit because she always wanted to see Russia. And the first thing I did as soon as I saw what had happened was I went back up to my room, called my sister, said, you can't come. And I have no idea what this is going to mean. And please watch CNN for me and make sure that it's not on CNN, because there were cameras there, because I don't want mom to freak out, you know. And luckily it wasn't enough of a story to make U.S. news. It was big news in Moscow, but it wasn't enough. So they were pretty cool with it. I mean, I would come home and tell them the stories, but not all the stories, obviously. You know, I left out the night we were almost murdered and some other stories.
Please elaborate on those if you will.
Yeah. Let me say that we thought we were going to be killed, but that's not exactly what happened. We, in the restaurant and nightlife business, you usually have a couple of dry runs before you open, friends and family night, if you want to call it. And after months of delays, we finally got the nightclub ready to open, and we had, 200 people in from like 8 to midnight. Like, it was very structured, just get the servers to try themselves out, bartenders, see if everything worked, with the intention of opening 3 or 4 days later. So we had this night. It went from 8 to midnight. As far as we could tell, it went perfectly. We were kind of very relieved because we didn't expect that. There were a lot of people there we knew, but there were a lot of people there we didn't know, and, guests of the owners, et cetera. So we went to bed. Will and I lived at that time in this horrible old hotel called the Rossiya, but they had redone in Russian fashion at the time. Everything was done sort of half-assed. So they had built these 18 amazing rooms, but they had no Western satellite phones. They had no Western TV. So really, expats who had real budget didn't stay there. So if you would stay at one of the other nicer hotels in Russia, but the rooms were spectacular. So we lived there very happily because for us, it was a great commute. Just take the elevator. And we had a chef. So we were like, okay, not so bad. So we go to bed, and the next morning, I get a phone call from Michael, who, as I mentioned, he grew up out here in Brooklyn on DeKalb Avenue, I guess, before it was cool. And he called and told me a story, and which I'll tell you in a second. And I listened to it, and I thought about it for a minute, and I got real quiet, and I just sort of said, you know what, Michael, start packing and tell Steve to start packing. Now, they lived in a house nearby. Because they were going to live there for 2 years. They couldn't. There was no economics to keep them in a hotel for the whole time. So they had a nice little house nearby. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, just start packing. We're going to leave tomorrow. And I woke up Will. I told him, and I called Tanya, this woman who would be, her real role in life was supposed to be our translator, but she kind of became our Uber mom and a very trusted person. And I called her and I told her what was going on, and she begged us to change our minds. And I'm like, nah, Tanya, we're going to go. I said, just please get tickets for us. And so she called me back in like an hour, and she said, the whole team wants to say goodbye to you, and everyone's so sad. And came back downstairs to the club and sort of hugged everyone and said goodbye. And it was very upsetting. And, but then we knew we were at peace with our decision, that we had made the right decision. And, people are like, well, why didn't you just go to the airport, or why didn't you It wasn't like that in Russia at that time. No one spoke English. Credit cards weren't in use. It wasn't like we had $3,000 in our pocket to go buy a ticket. So we needed them to help us get out. Anyway, we're up in our room. It's like 2:00 in the morning. We're packing, and I'm listening. I know because I was playing the music so much, people wanted to kill me, but I was listening to The Chronic by Snoop and Dr. Dre, and on a little Sony Discman. And I just kept hitting repeat, and Will was like, what the fuck? But I loved the album so much that it had just come out. And, the phone rings, and it's this young guy that worked for us, Alexei, who, again, was chosen by them, but sort of was co-opted by us. And he's like, David, can you please come down to the club? And I'm like, no, why would we do that? Like, it's 2 a.m. We're not even open. And he's like, yeah, I know, but the owners are here, and they want to see you. And I'm like, you tell Misha, who in my mind was the owner, or at least their owner's rep. I said, you tell Misha I'll just see him in New York when he comes back next week or 2 weeks, and we can talk it out, but I'm not coming down now. And there's a long pregnant pause, and he's like, it's not Misha. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, David, please, the real owners are here. Please come down. And I'm like, oh shit, they're going to hurt Alexei if we don't do. I wasn't even thinking about me, because that was beyond my lack of imagination. I should have been thinking more about like, oh shit, what did this mean for us? But we felt so untouchable that we just thought that it was something bad for him. So I'm like, well, we got to go downstairs. Alexei's in trouble. He's like, fuck you, I'm not going downstairs. I'm like, come on, let's go downstairs. So, what's the big deal? Take the elevator. So we go downstairs and go through the coat check room, which was sort of the back way to get in. And now we enter the nightclub, which was sort of a 10,000 square foot long, more of a rectangle than a square. And in the back, there was a private little VIP room, which was, smaller than the studio. But to get to that room, you had to walk through the big main room. And I swear there were 20, 25 to a side of the biggest, scariest humans I've ever seen in my life. Now, I'd seen a couple of them the night before at the club, but I just thought they were just bodyguards of bankers or whatever. Like, it didn't occur to me that they had anything to do with us. I'd never seen them before. But all of a sudden, I'm walking through, and we felt like chum, like in a shark boat. We thought that they were just literally, there was so much tension and anger in their faces, and we were like 3 guys walking through the middle of, basically looked like the Chicago Bears of 1949, because no face mask, like scars, tats, gold teeth. We're like, what the fuck? So then we passed by what I called the Kung Fu guards, because they were like all lean and mean dudes, but they probably kill you with one shot. And I had kind of gotten to know one of them. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak Russian, but he kind of looked at me and he just gave me the like you're fucked face. And, no idea what to expect. So now we walk into the VIP room, and the guys we think that own the club are cowering in the corner in between guys with Kalashnikovs. And they're like, heads are down, and they're like, look terrified. And there's 4 guys we've never seen in our lives sitting on a couch, dressed in Savile Row suits, and drinking like bankers, drinking tea with pinky up. And one guy was in jeans, but the other guys were in these 3 impeccable suits, and they sort of bid us to sit down. I kind of look at Will, I'm like, oh God. So we sit down, and this one guy starts stroking his beard. He might have been a little bit older than us, but Russians at the time tended to look older. And he just asked me to please tell him, and it was like his best Godfather imitation. I think he'd seen the movie too many times. He sort of croaked it out, like, and he asked me to tell him what had happened the night before. And I looked at Will, and Will was like, after you. So I told him the story, and which is that I guess a few minutes after everyone was done, and then we were clearing out the place, 4 of these goons from the other room had gone up to the bartender, who was this 25-year-old kid that was working for us from Russia, nice-looking young guy, already married, already a baby, very typical of the time. And they said, make us a gin and tonic. And as he was instructed, he said, I'm so sorry, sir, the bar is now closed. Please come back on Saturday. We'll be open to the public. And he looks at him and he said, look, you little motherfucker, I own this club. I'm a gangster. Make me the drinks, or when you leave, I'll kill you. And that's not like some asshole in New York who says that to a bounce. This is
dead serious.
Straight up dead serious. I will shoot you in the head when you walk out. So the bartender starts crying because he doesn't really. We were paying people $25 or $30 a night. I don't know what exactly. Their parents were making $7 a month. So we were changing people's lives, not out of benevolence. We were trying to hire the best we could find and make sure that we were the top of the game in all of Eastern Europe. That was our goal. Like, we were going to create something no one could believe exists. So we recruited, and those are all fun stories too, but we recruited all these amazing looking English speaking people to work for us. And so this guy's like, on the one hand, he obviously doesn't want to get killed. On the other hand, he's very loyal to us and his job was changing his whole life. So he didn't know what to do. So he's sort of paralyzed and crying. And Michael, our young manager, kind of jumps behind the bar and like, what's the problem? And they say the same thing to him, like, we know you're the American. We don't fucking care. We'll kill you too. So he just makes the 4 drinks. He's not stupid. It's like, cost us 30 cents. Makes the 4 drinks. And they kind of look at him, look at each other, start laughing, throw the drinks on our guys and walk out. And they were clearly ready to kill them if they had not. And so I told this story to this guy who still had not introduced himself. And I said, look, we're not here for this cowboy shit. Like, we're here to do a job. Our lives are through. This boy, I've known him since he was 8 years old or 10 years old. I said, I am not going back to Brooklyn to tell his mother he got killed over a gin and tonic. I'm not risking my life to just, I said, so we want no part of this. And he kind of strokes his beard again, and he looks at his compatriots and he looks back at me. I have zero idea what he's going to say. And he says, this is exactly the story that our sources have told us occurred. And he goes, it's completely my fault. And he said, my name is Yuri, and me and my associates and I, we own 16 businesses together, and we each divide up, and I'm in charge of 4 of them, and Manhattan Express is one of my projects. So everything that's occurred to you is my fault. These men, in fact, do work for us. In fact, they work for you, and they're your roof. They're your protection from outside sources. And we hired them in part to protect us from the outside, but we also hired them at first to protect us from you, because we never worked with Americans. You have to understand the culture in Russia at that time was everyone was stealing from everybody. That was the only way they survived under communism. So they just assumed we would be dirty too, but we were completely clean. Like, it never even occurred to us to steal anything or cut corners or anything like that. Like, not because we were afraid to get caught, it's just not in our DNA. Like, we're just trying to get an A, basically, right? Like, just want to do an amazing job and create something, because we really thought that we had stepped into an amazing opportunity where that if we did a great job here, it was going to get international press, and people from all around the world were going to hire us to create. So we were like, we just want this to be the most famous place ever in Eastern Europe. And so he said, we know how hard you work. We've been watching. We should have come forward sooner and introduced ourselves. It's completely our fault. I want to tell you that we're going to guarantee your personal safety, and we want you to go into the other room. We want you to choose the man who threatened you. He will come before all of us. He'll apologize, and then he'll never be seen again. And they were clearly saying they were going to kill the guy as an example to everyone else. Never fuck with the Americans. So, and the reason we knew it was a real threat was because 2 weeks earlier, there's a movie that you wouldn't have seen because it's a long time ago called Miller's Crossing, where they discover, a gang discovers someone stealing from them, and they bury him waist up in a pit, and they rev up a car, and they threaten to run him over unless he tells who his conspirators were. And when he won't tell, they run him over. Well, they actually did that in Russia 2 weeks earlier. to someone. And not our guys, but everyone in Russia was talking about that. So we knew it wasn't an idle threat. And, again, I looked at Will and he kind of, looked back at me, passed the baton. And I said, look, you seem very earnest. I believe that you intend to keep us safe, but from what I've seen in Russia at this time, I don't really believe anyone is safe. But because you seem so committed to keeping us here, and he had mentioned that we know Manhattan Express is going to be a huge success, but we know it will never happen without you guys, and It was very complimentary. I said, look, why don't we compromise, and why don't we agree to stay for a month? And if we feel safe for a month, we'll complete our 2-year consulting agreement. But if at any time during that month, any of this kind of craziness starts again, I would like your word, again, naive, because, I'm asking a guy for his word I met 5 minutes ago. But at the time, I felt like I could believe in the guy. I said, I'd like your word that you'll pay all 4 of us for what we're due for the 2 years and safely get us to the airport. And again, he sort of he hasn't smiled yet at all. And he just kind of strokes his beard. He looks back at the other 3 guys, looks back at us, and finally breaks his poker face and breaks into a broad smile and says, this is exactly where I hoped we would end up in this conversation. And we had the equivalent of a 1993 bro hug, I guess. And so as we leave the room, we hear them, and we didn't speak much Russian yet, but we hear them talking to the actual head of security and the other putative owners in a tone that you can imagine of I'm sure what they were saying was, if you ever fucking do this again, I'm going to kill all you motherfuckers kind of thing. Not to us, to these guys. And the sort of kung fu bodyguard that had given me the evil eye, as I walked past him, he kind of looked at me and laughed. And I realized he had been fucking with me. He knew we were safe, but he knew he could scare the shit out of me just by shaking his head. And then we had to walk back through the gauntlet of these dudes. And we realized we had misinterpreted not necessarily their hate for us, but we had it was fear. They really expected, because life was very cheap in Russia at that time. So this guy, and I knew exactly who it was, to be honest, he fully expected that we were going to single him out, because a Russian would have, but we never would have, right? So he came to that meeting thinking, I'm dying tonight. And I, as imperceptibly as I could, I nodded at him, and he, as imperceptibly, I think, as he could, he nodded at me. And to this day, I can't tell you his name, but a lot of shit happened in that club over the next 2 years, and I had my own personal, bodyguard. This guy was behind me in a microsecond if shit went down, because I had saved his life by not identifying him that night. So, cut to 3 days later, we go to brunch at this spectacular hotel called the Metropole with these young guys that my sister knew from business school, and is as different a venue as you can imagine. It's almost like one of the Grand Palais palaces, hotels in Paris, or the Plaza here in New York or something, and stained glass windows and violin quartet playing Mozart and Bach. And we go to have brunch with these guys, and they had sent us a driver. Guy had to be 90 years old in basically a tin can with wheels to pick us up. It was the worst car I've ever been in my life. It was terrifying. We get there, sit to have lunch with these guys, and so we just start bullshitting. They're a little younger than us, maybe a year or two, but not much. And what are you guys doing here? What are you guys doing here? Da, da, da. And they said they were in the beer business, and I said, well, beer business? This is a vodka company. And they're like, country. And they said, you'd be surprised at how much beer is consumed by guys getting off their shift in the factory. And I said, okay. I said, but you're in the beer business? What the fuck does that mean? And they're like, well, we don't really tell people this, but because you're Lauren's brother, we've, under different company names, we've acquired 80% of the domestic breweries in Russia, and very quietly, and we're almost at 100%. And when we get to 100%, we're going to try and bundle them and sell them, which they did for a fortune at some point. So I'm looking at them and I'm like, okay, so if you guys are doing so well, why are you driving around in the shittiest car that I've ever seen in my life? And they're like, David, don't you get it? Don't you get how dangerous it is here yet? And I'm like, well, I'm starting to get it, but what do you mean? And they're like, we don't want anyone looking at us. We don't want to be in a fancy car. We don't want to call any attention to ourselves. We're trying to get in, make our money, and get the fuck out. And I said, okay, so do you live like us in the hotels because you feel safe? And they're like, no, that's the one conceit. That's the one thing we spent money on. We bribed our way into former KGB headquarters so that we could live safely because they have gun turrets, and you have to, be identified to come in and come out and all that stuff. And I'm like, holy shit. And then completely unprompted, and this is where the, magic of conversation comes up sometimes. And they go, yeah, but there's this one guy, and even though our building is so safe, when he comes in a bomb-proof, not bulletproof, bomb-proof Mercedes limo, and there's a chase van in front and behind. And before he gets out of his car, 8 guys get out of each of the other vans and form a human wall for him to walk through so that snipers can't kill him from the side. And I'm like, what the fuck? Who's that guy? And they're like, well, he's the head of the mafia for all of Moscow and southern Russia. I'm like, what's his name? They're like, his name's Yuri. And I turn the color of your shirt. Now, that's the difference between me and Will. Will laughs. Like, he thinks it's hysterical that this is our boss. And I think it's the worst moment I've ever, we realize now the guy that we had been sitting with 3 nights earlier was the head of the mafia for all of Russia at the time, or all of Moscow at the time. Most powerful. He was like Kaiser Sose. And so, to be honest, he treated us with tremendous respect all the way through, because we were, as we said, we were just hardworking, and he noticed it and he saw it, and we developed a really great rapport. I would say honor amongst thieves, except we weren't thieves, but I mean, he just treated us with great respect because he saw, like, these guys are busting their ass and they're trying to create a great product for us, and we need to protect them. So what started out as like the worst phone call of my life turned into like everything was. I'm not saying there weren't other things that happened, i.e. being bombed, or there were other incidents, but yeah, the big one was thinking we were being summoned to be killed, and thankfully we're not.
Did you think that one poor step, you could be gone in a second?
We didn't really, because oddly enough, and we hadn't understood it up until that night. Oddly enough, well, there were 2 things. One, we always just felt safe. We were kind of escorted around in nice cars, and we didn't really go into Moscow, or, so, and there were always people around us, but we really didn't realize we were being watched at all times and protected, and that was part of it. So, no, we never really felt that way. And then, of course, once we realized who we were working for, we certainly didn't. But also, up until about a year through our being there, there seemed to be this unwritten rule of it was almost understood by Russians with an unspoken way, don't fuck with the West. We need them. We need Americans to teach us how to do this shit. Capitalism is 3 years old. We need these people, whether you're using. And there was a very deep divide. You could tell who really wanted us and welcomed us and understood it was important to have fresh ideas and teach them capitalism and teach them how to run a business. And then you could tell, for lack of a better phrase, the sort of Putin side of things, the head of security was a former KGB guy who we didn't realize spoke English for the first 9 months we were there, and he actually spoke perfect English and never spoke it in front of us deliberately to make us think he didn't speak English. And there was a faction that wanted us to fail badly, because to them, Mother Russia, great pride in Russia. Russia doesn't need these fucking Americans. What are these guys doing here trying to teach us how to run a business? We're Russians. We have the greatest literature, the greatest music. So there was almost this hostile divide between people who were like so embracing of us, and then others who were like wanted us to fail. Luckily, we were protected by Yuri and his guys. But yeah, there was another hotel in town called the Radisson Slavoyanskaya. And there was an American who sort of rolled around town as if he was the true owner and the true boss. And he had worked in the Bush administration, the first administration, and somehow got appointed to this job. But the truth was that it was a small Chechen gangster who, if you spent any time in that hotel, actually ran that hotel. And he would sit and drink his espresso, and you knew not to fuck with his table. Like, he just sat there and it was clear. But this guy, Paul, would run around Russia acting as if I'm the guy, and I don't know what the specifics are that he did wrong, but they tried to convince him to leave the country, and he refused, and he barricaded himself in his suite at the hotel, and they stabbed his bodyguard in the hallway, and they told, not to kill him, but they stabbed him in the shoulder, and they said, tell your boss it's high time, which is a very Russian phrase. It's high time for him to leave Russia. And he didn't leave, and somehow they lured him to a meeting with the pretense of being a safe, neutral site, and it was like the St. Valentine's Day massacre, and that was the first time. It was probably a year into our stay there that an American had been killed, and we're like, oh, the jig's up. Like, they've lost the fear of killing an American if American steps out of line. But again, you ask if we felt safe. We did, because the two things I put in our contract were we have no control over taxation, and we don't want any control over banking. And I deliberately never let them teach me the combination to the safe. I never wanted to know. I never touched a dollar there or a ruble. I mean, that's a funny thing. Like, our guys were so powerful that I think if it was 93, so it was probably January of 94, to prop up their currency, they decided that no more, we were accepting all money, and it was all $100 bills. There was no credit cards, and everything was U.S. currency. They didn't want the ruble to be devalued, so they made a pronouncement that all retail sales had to be in rubles. So you would have to convert money, and our guys were so powerful, they got Manhattan Express declared a branch of their bank. And so, in effect, all our bartenders were bank tellers. So you could still pay. You could only get change in rubles, but you could still pay for your drinks or your dinner in American dollars. So guys would come in with a couple of, $100 bills, and they would get back, 50 rubles or whatever the exchange rate was at the time. So basically, no, we didn't feel threatened, because anything we wanted kind of happened for us. It was amazing.
Did you ever meet that Yuri figure again?
Oh, I saw him all the time. He was really, for lack of a better comparison, and it was like Rick's Cafe in Casablanca. I mean, Manhattan Express was the de facto meeting ground for anyone who's important in Russia at that time. Politicians. I don't know how much you weren't born, so we were there for the last coup, which is a whole nother insane story. I don't want to bore you with the whole Russian thing.
So you're not boring me at all.
Okay, but if you want to hear that story, I can tell you. But there was a coup, and they had seized their own White House, which was for them like seizing the Senate, not the president's residence. Their White House, their Senate was called the White House. And this faction of diehard communists seized their own Senate, trying to mount the last coup against Yeltsin. And I believe the guys' names were Ruslan and Kazbulatov. I might be getting it slightly wrong, but they were sentenced to a year in jail for their role in this coup. And the very first night that they got out of jail, where did they come? Manhattan Express. I mean, it was just, if you were, I forget his name, I'd have to Google, but the Russian version of Sinatra. From him, from the 60-year-old guy that everyone in Russia loved and grew up on, to this amazing band that if I had known more about how to do it, called Moralny Codex, who sang half their songs in English and half in Russian, that I tried to figure out how to get them to come to America, because I used to play their music at a place we had in New York called Union Bar, and people would ask me, who's that band? They had no idea it was a Russian band. So anyone who was anyone was in our place.
And then you mentioned the recruitment was the way you guys recruited was pretty interesting for the people that worked for you.
Well, yeah, I didn't know that they were going to do it, but they ran ads all over Moscow. We knew what we wanted. We went to, in America at this point, or even for the last 20 years, if you show up at a modeling agency and say, hey, I want to hire some models, they look at you like, yeah, you and every fucking other idiot in New York who wants to hire models, get the fuck out of here. But in Russia, to walk into a modeling agency in 1992 and say, hey, we want to hire 7 of your girls to be hostesses, they don't have to stop modeling, but because at the time it was very hard to get out of Russia. So unless you were in that uber elite, I'm literally talking about 0.01% of models who could get a contract in Paris, guaranteed visa contract. You couldn't just, as a pretty Russian girl, you couldn't just say, I'm going to go to Paris and try my luck on the runway and see if I get hired. So these girls were basically trapped in Russia. They were beautiful women, and actually a lot of great-looking guys too. And so we went to all the agencies and we said, send all your girls to this date in this place, and then they ran tons of ads for us as well. But what I didn't know, and I did these, just happened, Will and I took turns, so I happened to be there for the interview days. And I'm more on that side of the business anyway. I was always more on the personnel, music, marketing side, and Will is always much more on the systems, how does this going to work side of things. He likes that stuff. It's ironic because literally he looked like some combination of Brad Pitt and Warren Beatty in their prime. I mean, he's the handsomest guy ever. They used to call him laser eyes in Russia because he has these cutting blue eyes and jet black hair, and so no one had ever seen anyone like him. So they used to talk about him like you'd hear, oh, that's Laser Eye's partner, you know. But I ended up doing all these interviews. What I didn't know, because you would never do this in America, they set us up in a theater. I don't know, like the Beacon Theater or something like that. And I was in the front row, and then there were all these subordinates to me, and I'm not very comfortable with that, but all the Russian versions of me behind me. And then they would march, I don't know, 600 people in front of me on a stage, 10 at a time, and have them turn around and all, for me to say who I wanted to see and talk to. And so I narrowed it from, 700 or 1,000 or whatever we had to see over 2 days down to, 200, and then down to our staff of like 50 or 60. But that's how the process worked. And I remember one kid in particular, I knew right from seeing him, so we got to the second phase to do the interviews, and I knew right from looking at him that I wanted to hire him. He was a great looking kid. He was just beaming of personality. And we sat down, we started bullshitting for 2 minutes. His name was Dima. His English was pretty good, but he was just oozing of charisma, And I said, Dima, okay. In my mind, I used to call him Joe Namath because of this answer, because Joe Namath wrote and you asked me before we started talking if I was ever starstruck by meeting someone. I was starstruck when I met Joe Namath because as a little kid, that was my guy. So Joe Namath's autobiography was, I can't wait till tomorrow because I get better looking every day. So this kid Dima is sitting across from me. I said, all right, Dima, you look out there. You see there's 100 guys who want this job. There's only 10 bartending jobs. Why am I giving this job to you? And he looks at them. He looks back. He goes, because I'm better looking and funnier than all of them. And I'm like, okay, you're hired. I mean, he knew who he was. And we paired him with this really lovable sort of Russian fat kid named Alex, who was, like Santa Claus without the Santa suit, like just funny and jovial and just beaming of joy kind of thing. And so you had this tag team of this like lean model looking guy who with the slick back hair was gorgeous, and then you had this sort of roly poly sweet as could be, and they were like famous bartenders in Russia from that. It was perfect casting.
So then how long in total was your time in Russia? Talk about the end as well, like when you get out.
Well, it was a 2-year agreement. The place crushed it. It was doing like $5 million a year US, which even today would be a good number, but back then it was a ridiculous number. I mean, if you think about it, we'd be happy to do $5 million US at some of the places we have in New York right now. So this is 1993, and we're doing that. It was stupid numbers, but there was a real competition almost to outspend the other table. Stuff we never would have anticipated. But like these were young ballers, and it's somewhat similar in some ways to when you hear music from the original hip hop culture of like bottle service and sort of showing off a little bit and stuff. And so at that time in Russia, it was like basically who's got a bigger dick kind of thing going on. It was like, and so if one table bought 6 bottles of champagne and 4 lobsters, the table next to them would just order 14 steaks and 12 bottles of champagne for no reason. They could never have consumed it, but they just wanted to say, I'm tougher than that guy, or I'm richer than that guy. I mean, the stuff that went on at Manhattan Express was insane. We had a gun check. So you'd have these beautiful, I wouldn't go to a place in Russia at the time that didn't have a gun check. Because it was so dangerous. So you would have these gorgeous women show up in like, stilettos and micro minis and a little Chanel purse, and they'd very calmly pull out their little 2-shooter gun and hand it to the little lady, and she'd lock it in the safe, and then on the way out she'd get her gun back. So the little details of Russia at that time were so crazy. But our contract came to an end, and by then Yuri and I had a really good rapport, and I said, look, and they had brought in this expert from Sochi to take over for us, and he was as throwback to the bad, horrible communist managers as I'd ever seen. And out of pure concern, I did not want to stay. We were about to do a new business in New York. Tyler's mom and I were getting more serious. We weren't married yet, but we were like, I was not trying to stay in Russia. But I also was so deeply, I mean, this was like a family to me. I spent probably 14 out of 24 months living there. So, and we built this thing into this kind of famous place. And I didn't want to see it fall apart. So I went to Yuri and I said, Yuri, you're making a terrible mistake with this guy. And he's like, no, we've had many people tell us he's a great expert. He comes from such and such resort. And I'm like, Yuri, trust me. We know each other now. Like, this guy's terrible. He's going to ruin this place. And we sort of made a gentleman's bet that I said, you're going to call me within 6 months. I think it was September. I said, you're going to call me in 6 months. He goes, no, I'm not. And we were cool. I said, you're going to call me. And he's like, I swear 5 months and 2 weeks, sometime within my time frame, they called us and flew us back. And they said, you're right. He's ruined it. It's filled with like low end, all the stuff we didn't let in, low end prostitutes, low end gangsters, all the, I spent a lot of time teaching the doorman what I wanted, there, and what I wanted the place to feel like, and who to select. And, I said, look, money will follow art, or it'll follow beauty, or it'll follow culture. You can always get the moneyed guys. You just need to get all the other stuff in here. And, there were many crazy stories at the door of me trying to do that as well. But they now went for the bottom line. They just went for it. And they had strippers in there, and they were running a gambling room, and it was just terrible. And we went and saw the new clubs, the, Russia nightlife 2.0, if you will, and they were kicking our ass. They were just so much better. They had better lighting, better music, better sound systems. I hated the fucking music. It was early EDM, so I was miserable. I was a total hip hop guy. So I was like, are you kidding me? But that's what they wanted to hear. So anyway, we went back to Yuri and we said, look, we can fix it. I said, one party's not going to do it. Like, you can't, yes, people, if you leave it as Manhattan Express, people will come one time to say hi to David and Will because we're popular and they know us here, and but they're not coming a second time. They don't give a shit. The place looks like crap. There's 4 better clubs. I said, you need to set, the thing you have is you still have the best location in Russia. We were across the street from the Kremlin and St. Basil's. We were literally dead zero. If the U.S. was going to drop a bomb, we would have been the target because we were in the exact center of Moscow. I said, so just spend a few $100,000, $300,000-$400,000 or something, and let's rebrand it. Some new furniture, some better sound system, a new name. And they just weren't willing to pull the trigger on that. And so I stayed in touch for many years with the staff who would work for us, and it just continued on this, decline that I predicted, but they just weren't willing to reinvest in it. So it was sad. It happens. I mean, it happens in nightlife everywhere, but it was sad because they didn't have to let it happen. But it was predictable.
And then how did your experience in nightlife in I guess the mid 1990s then prepare you for Lotus and all of more your ventures here in New York?
Well, the truth is, we, by accident over there, we met some people and they said, hey, our friends own a bagel shop on Union Square and they don't know what to do with it. Can you go talk to them? And we're like, okay. Literally, we're like, okay, we'll go. And because, we really liked the person who asked us to do the favor. And we get there, and at the time, and again, this is, long before your time, but Park Avenue South was really a hot spot in New York. There was a place called The Coffee Shop, a place called Park Avalon. There was about to be a place called Lemon. A lot of nightlife. The Meatpacking District hadn't happened yet, so a lot of nightlife was centered right around there. And these guys had this failing bagel shop that was amazing in terms of location, right in the middle of this. And we said, look, we don't know anything about bagels, but this would be a great bar. And they kind of looked at us like we were out of our minds. And it turned out to work out perfectly. Someone we had met in Russia put up the money, an American, put up the money for it. And we did a high-end, nice-looking, but not uber-exclusive like Rex was or like Lotus was to be, cocktail bar on Park Avenue South. And we made them partners in it, but they were able to go on. She became an accountant for a restaurant. He went cooking at another. So they basically now had a third income source. They got real jobs. They weren't even able to pay themselves from their bagel place. So now he went to be a cook. She went to be an accountant. Plus they got money from Union Bar. We opened Union Bar in 1995. And this is where Will is so bright and so, in many ways, so much brighter than I am, or sees things differently. And that's always important in a partnership. The first 3-4 weeks was, again, our normal crowd, like this celebrity or that model or this whatever. And then it just sort of morphed away from that. It sort of became Park Avenue South ad executives or insurance executives or whatever it may be. And I said to Will, fuck, wow, we lost our crowd. And he said, are you an idiot? He's like, look around this room. He goes, it's completely packed with nice looking people who don't give a shit if we're here or not. it's the best thing we've ever done because we're not tied to it. We could do 3 more of these and no one would know. Let's just make sure this one stays working and we'll do other stuff. So we did. We started looking for other opportunities to do upscale bars that didn't require being the coolest kid on the block. And just by accident in 1998 or 9, I very mistakenly took on the role of president of the New York Nightlife Association because a guy talked me into it. He said, look, I'm selling my place. You're the only other person in nightlife who has a law degree. We need someone like you to be able to go to these meetings. And I'm like, okay, whatever. It didn't sound like so. It turned out that's why my hair is all gray. But so I was sort of a little bit still in it. And so I knew a lot about the laws and cabaret laws and what was going on in nightlife and the move sort of against it in certain neighborhoods. And out of nowhere, a broker came to us with this spot on 14th between 9th and 10th. And I'm like, oh, who cares about that area? That area's, it's literally was a couple of rundown bars, but it was primarily transvestite hooker area. Like that's really what it was known for. And I'm like, no one's going there. No one from our world is going to that area for nightlife. And he goes, you just go look at it. Took a look at it. I was like, oh my God. Like it was 3 stories, fully licensed, low rent, had the cabaret license. But what was most important was it was in the last area of Manhattan that was zoned for manufacturing, which meant that they could not deny us the licenses and that no neighbors could complain because no one is allowed to live in a manufacturing neighborhood. And that's crucial because then no one can just build an apartment building next to you and then 2 years later say, hey, I want you to close your club. So we knew that we would be safe there. And it felt like Godfather 3 with Al Pacino. I felt like, we're trying to get out and they're forcing us back in. And I said, well, I don't know if we can not do this. Like, we almost have to do this. And we went and got the guys who that were very much like us in 1990 when we did Rex. So it's 10 years later. We're not quite we have what I would have called residual juice. We still knew a lot of people, but I was, let's see, what year? I was married. Will was married. We weren't living that life of like, let's be out every night. We had gotten kind of used to a union bar not needing us to be there every night. So as I said, we still knew kind of everybody, but we weren't aggressively living that life. And so we went and got these 2 guys who were running, they were the promotional directors of this big club in West Village called Life, which was the club of the moment. And we said, do you guys want to be partners in a venture? A guy named Mark Baker and Jeffrey Jaw. And they were a little bit nuts and a little unfocused, but that was okay because we didn't need them to do that. And eventually we formed a team and built, and were able to raise the money and build Lotus. And we really, again, people always say, oh, you're always in there. It was a happy accident. I didn't know the Meatpacking District was going to, I didn't know Keith McNally was going to open Pastis, which was arguably the most important restaurant of that year, or for many years at that time, around the corner from us. So 3 or 4 things happened at once that all opened in that area, and all of a sudden people were like, oh shit, this is the new area. And people just went to Pastis or went to a restaurant called Florent, which is now gone, and then would come to us at Lotus. So we got to the right place at exactly the right moment.
We're going to take a quick break.
Sure.
Talk about Manscaped.
Okie doke.
Support for Where Is This Going comes from Manscaped, who is #1 in men's below-the-belt grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for all of your family jewels. Manscaped is forever changing the grooming game with their Perfect Package 2.0. Inside the Perfect Package, you'll find their electric trimmer called the Lawnmower 2.0. To get those hard-to-reach places, you'll find the Plow inside. The Plow is a single-blade razor that will prevent razor bumps. And, of course, let's not forget about the Crop Preserver, an anti-chafing ball deodorant and moisturizer. You already put deodorant on your armpits, so why are you not putting it on the smelliest part of your body? It's time to get clean with this Perfect Package 2.0. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code WTG at manscaped.com. Always use the right tools for the job, and your balls will thank you. Back into it.
Yeah, I checked my fantasy football, but that sounded pretty good.
I'm curious. You've had a lot of partnerships with a variety of people. For you, when you're looking at a business partnership, what do you look for in a partner and in a venture? How do you kind of gauge and assess different people you're going to work with in different situations?
Well, it's definitely evolved over time. I mean, up until 6, 7 years ago, I did everything with Will, and occasionally with other people, like Mark and Jeffrey. We reached out to them because, as for Lotus, as I said, they were as in it as you could possibly be. They knew every fashion designer, every graphic designer, every editor of every important magazine, every model in New York. So we knew they were the right people for us to join forces with at that time, and it sort of 2 + 2 = 5 at that time, and we really did crush it coming out of the gate. Look, our problems were nothing compared to what really happened to people. I mean, 3,000 people lost their life, but Lotus was 13 months into it and on like exploding when 9/11 happened, and it really knocked us off track because for over a year, people really didn't want to go out that way. They still needed to eat. They would go get pasta or burgers or whatever, but no one was going out to celebrate. And we lost. We would have been the first New York nightclub in Vegas. Vegas was going to build us a Lotus in Las Vegas, but that fell apart after that. So that we chose those partners at that time because they were the right guys for what we were trying to accomplish at that moment, which we knew we wanted to sort of rule nightlife, if you will. I mean, it sounds arrogant and horrible. I'm sorry to say it that way, but we knew that we couldn't do it ourselves anymore. That we would have been like, people would have come in out of sort of old relationships. They'd come and hang out a little bit, but after time, we weren't current. They were super, super current, and we knew that we needed them to make it happen. Then about 7 years ago, Lamb's Club was already open. Will had passed on a couple of rooftop opportunities that had been presented to us because he thought we were too busy with various projects, and I got offered the roof of the James, which is called Jimmy at the James, and I went to Will and the other guys, and I'm like, we should do this, and they said no, we have too much going on. We're gonna get this, we're gonna get that, and I'm like, look, we all know we keep getting offered all this shit, and then it all falls through, or one happens and 6 don't. I'm like, I'm not saying no to this one. I'm telling you again, like, we should do this. It's the 18th floor of a building in Soho with almost 360-degree views and a pool. I'm not passing this up. And they said, no, we don't want to do it. We have too much other shit going on. I'm like, okay. I don't, fair warning, like going once, going twice. And I went and got these 2 other guys who had sort of a hot restaurant at the time, and that I knew a little bit from, and we formed a partnership to do that outside. That was the first time I'd ever done anything outside of working with Will. We got asked at the Lamb's Club to work with the Zakarians. Jeffrey's a famous, he's much more famous chef now than he was then, but his wife had worked with us at Lotus, and when they got married, they got offered the Lamb's Club, and they thought it was a little too much for them to take on their own. There's a 3-floor venue with a big bar, and so they asked us to work with them on that. But once Will left the business 7 years ago to work in unbelievably drug and alcohol rehabilitation, which is, I'm only saying unbelievably because we used to tease his wife, who's one of my close friends as well, that, she's creating a vertical monopoly because, we'll create the problem and he'll fix it and we'll ha ha ha. But he really took it to heart as her business started to grow, and he saw the real need for it. And he's very much, Will's very, very interested in construction and in building things and in business planning, and he started to help them as they decided to build their first inpatient facility in Massachusetts. And he came to me one day and said, look, I love being up there. I love fishing. I love hunting. I love running in the woods. I love skiing. He goes, I'm leaving New York. I'm going to go run this place. I'm like, what? I mean, we'd been working together for over 20 years. So, but it wasn't like we were having a fight. He was just changing his life. It was like Will 3.0. So wasn't much I could say. I'm like, congratulations, and he's like, I want to spend more time with my wife. I want to help people. I want to live. All I can say was good luck, basically. So, and we're still great friends, but so everything I do now going forward, I have to figure out who's the right partner for it. Thankfully at the Skylark, the Skylark is a rooftop in the heart of the Garment District, and the guy who had started to build it, who owns the building, I met him through happenstance, and he asked me to read his business plan, and I read it, and I thought it was really off base, and I had no interest in it. I had no motive. He just said, "What do you think?" And I explained to him why I thought it wasn't going to work. And you could hear all the air go out of the guy. And he asked me what I would do, and I explained how I would approach it. Again, just as a hypothetical. And then we hung up. And he called me back a few days later, and he goes, "I can't stop thinking about what you've said. I think I'd rather work with you than the guy I was supposed to do it with." And I was kind of in shock, and I'm looking around like, am I on candid camera? Because he said, "I'll fund the whole thing. I just want you to run it." And that's when I was like, okay. And he introduced me to a guy named Jim Kirsch, who runs a huge catering company called Abigail Kirsch Catering. They do all Chelsea Piers, and they're really arguably either the first or second best known catering company in New York. And we partnered up to do the Skylark. And so now Jim and I are doing two to three more projects together. This kind of model we've developed, kind of call it nightlife for grown-ups, where we do these sophisticated rooftop bars, and then there's an event component. And he's taught me a lot about the event business, although I would not say I know it. Don't ever let me run your wedding. Like, I'm not that guy. But I've taught him everything about sort of the bar lounge nightlife business. And so we work very well together. He's really an ego-free, smart, wonderful guy who just wants to go back to Connecticut at the end of the day. So each place that, with Café Clover, I have other partners, and we're doing three more projects together. And so each place I try that comes up for me, I mean, sometimes they come up for the other guys, and they're nice enough to ask me, but each place that's come up for me, I try and sit back and say, okay, who's the right strategic partner for this? Because I can't do all of it myself. I don't have a partner anymore, like the one partner anymore. Tyler's too young for me to pull out of college, although I think about it all the time. Because he's become remarkably self-assured and confident in introducing himself to people and handling himself really, really well. And I don't necessarily want to curse him with this business, because there's so many downsides of this business. I mean, it looks great from the outside. Like, it looks like you just get to walk around and... We
talk about some of those downsides.
Sure. I mean,
some of the misconceptions that from the restaurant business.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest misperception right now, and probably for the last 10 years, is that, politicians and the public thinks that you're just, rolling in dough if you own a restaurant. And the margins are so thin, and people really forget how high the failure rate is. They may have a favorite couple, 3 or 4 restaurants that they've been going to for 15 years, and they think everyone's like that, but they forget how many places that they've tried, and then they go back a year later and it's gone. And that's really, it's a huge failure. I don't know what the exact numbers is, 80% in the first 5 years or something, but it's a huge failure rate, and it's getting much more difficult. And what is being missed by politicians and what you see going on is that the rise, and far be it for me to argue against everyone earning a living wage, but the impact of going to $15, that has had a huge impact on the restaurant industry, because now you really have to pay 18 or 19, because someone can just get 15. They can just go work at Starbucks and get a better health plan or whatever. So it's not 15. And so that's great for society that people are earning that kind of money. On the other hand, the unintended consequence is there are fewer jobs, because you can't afford that extra host, that extra manager, that extra 2 servers. So you just don't hire them. And I mean, I know a place that, they built, we could never do this in one of our places, but they built a beer wall, and you buy almost like a Metro card, and you get a glass, and they built it as sort of a gimmick, right? Like, how much fun is this? You put $40 on a card or whatever, and whatever beer you want to sample, you just put your card in the wall and you go to that thing. But the real thing is it cut out 6 servers for them, because it sort of killed 2 birds with one stone. They had a great marketing gimmick, but on the other hand, that's 6 servers they don't have to hire. And so and the next level of this is this movement, which is, 8 states passed it, 2 repealed it, thank gosh. There is some movement to do it in New York, which is insane because people just don't really understand, to eliminate what's called the tip credit, which is, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but basically tipped employees, I think, are at $10 right now instead of $15. Because the presumption is that they're making so much money from tips. I believe the last time the New York City Hospitality Association studied 14,000 New York City servers or bartenders, they're making on average $25 an hour because of tips with their wage. there's a movement to do away with the tip credit, which would cost each restaurant for every full-time employee, for each server or each bartender that's a full-time person, $12,000 per employee. Now you take a little place like Café Clover. Let's say we have 20 full-time employees who are bartenders or servers. That's $240,000. We're out of business. Like, it's a little restaurant. We can't do that. Like, we're negative already at that number. So it's well intended. It sounds great on paper. Celebrities sign up for it. Like, oh yeah, everyone should get, but it's not like this is a diner off Route 7 somewhere where someone's literally making $10 an hour, and then at the end of the night is scraping together $30 in tips and can't pay their rent. These people are making in New York $200, $300, $400 a night, which is fantastic. And they've chosen it because they've chosen this lifestyle because they want to act, they want to paint, they want to dance, they want to go to school, they create jewelry, whatever it is that they've chosen, that they need this kind of lifestyle where they can only work 3-4 nights a week or a couple of shifts a week because they want to pursue what it is that they want to pursue. Fantastic. That's what we're there, sort of a mutually beneficial arrangement. If that goes away, I think you're going to see a lot of closures or a lot of places cutting back to half the staff and making people do 2-3 times the level of work because there's just no way that small mom and pop restaurants can afford that. So I don't know where it's going. That's why I joked about Ty. I mean, he's got 3 more years of college, but we have so many projects coming in the next, I think we have somewhere between, depending if they all actually happen, somewhere between 6 and 8 things coming in the next year. I literally can't do it all. So I have great partners, but to just even go check in on all of them, I'm either going to have to hire someone who I really feel great about, or tell Tyler to come to school in New York and do it with me. We'll see.
Are there any big other fields other than the restaurant business that you hope to one day kind of venture out to?
I mean, the natural progression for me, some people go into real estate because they figure out a way to buy the buildings that they're in, but we've never really been afforded that opportunity. We've always been in buildings that were unapproachably expensive. No one was looking to sell in the meatpacking district when we were there. That would have been the only area that seems to be potentially possible for me is some stuff within the entertainment world. Some of the stories I told you about Russia are currently owned by Hulu, being developed by a production company in concert with Hulu. We'll see if they actually make it.
It sounds like a movie to me.
Yeah, it's definitely a movie or a TV show. There's no question. I mean, I only told you 1/20th of the stories, and so I'm hoping that happens. And I've been working with my brother-in-law Irv Gotti, who's famous for Murder Inc., which is Ja Rule and Ashanti and things like that. He has a show on BET called why am I forgetting the name of our show at this minute right now? Tales. I'm sorry, called Tales, where he's taken each year he's taken last year's 8, I think this year was 12 of the most iconic songs in hip hop and turned them into hour-long stories. But Irv and I have developed this really great rapport over the years, and his company's called Visionary Ideas, and he truly is a visionary, and he's got 7 or 8 ideas, some for movies, some for sitcoms, and over the years, one of the great things about doing what I do, probably one of the best things, is I've been able to meet people from a really diverse field. I kind of can get to almost anybody. I'm kind of one phone call away from almost anybody. And because I do have the law background, and I don't come across as I hope I don't come across as just someone who's always asking for favors, et cetera. But there's substance there. I mean, the Russian story, those are real. So when I first asked some people to help me get interviews in Hollywood or conversations going in Hollywood, people were like, oh, okay, whatever. David's nice to me. I'll help him. But then when I got to tell these stories, I could see the expressions on some of the production companies' faces, like, holy shit, what? This is better than any stuff we make up. I'm like, yeah, and I know, and it really happened. So similarly with Irv, he's got some really tremendous ideas, but he didn't really know how to go about getting them made necessarily. So I've been able to say, well, look, if you're going to pursue sitcoms, you should really sit with this guy, who's a guy I happen to go to college with, and they've gotten along famously, and they're trying to produce 2 shows together right now. Another friend of mine created Narcos, and now has a show on the air called Godfather of Harlem. And so I introduced Irv to Chris because Irv has an idea for a movie that I think Chris would be absolutely perfect to write, and Irv is completely taken with Chris, and vice versa, because Irv is such a character. So I'm hoping that I end up being a small part of the production of all this stuff that Irv is working on, and then I'm assuming and I'm hoping that can kind of leverage off that. And if we actually get 2 or 3 things made that I can say, oh, I'm a producer on that, then it's a different conversation the next time I have a good idea. Then my next conversation with someone in LA is, well, I produced X, Y, and Z. So we'll see.
Did you ever imagine now, about 30 years ago, when you first made that career change, that you'd be sitting here with these 30 years of stories and experiences in life?
You know, it wasn't really a plan. It was really, I did not imagine it, in the sense that I think one of the best things and one of the worst things about being young is I mean, there's some people who are so supremely directed when they're 22 or 18 or 27. They know exactly. We weren't. We were just. It was more of an antidote to how unhappy we were. And we were trying to figure out how do we capitalize on what we're good at. And what we were good at the time was, we felt that we were smarter than a lot of the people who we figured we were trying to do what we were trying to do. We weren't necessarily. We didn't realize how many super smart guys were working in the restaurant industry, and how hard it was. We were naive about how difficult it was. But we were right that we were able to attract a really interesting, fascinating, diverse, and really nice crowd. Like, we're still really friends with so many of the people that we met during those days. And, I used to play Saturday afternoon touch football with half of our customers, and I had a poker game that we started at Lotus that I still play in today, with some amazing guys, the guys who writes Billions, and, all these fascinating guys who weren't necessarily that guy 20 years ago. They were like going to be there, but now they're there. And so on that level, it's been great.
If you could give a piece of advice to your 28-year-old self, knowing what you know now today, what would it be?
I think we did it a little backwards. I think we should have worked for somebody in the industry for a year or two before we opened our own place. But we were full of piss and vinegar, and we were really eager to get it into the field. But I think we would have benefited by spending a year or two working for someone really hard-nosed and really experienced, and then opened, because we really just opened on the strength of, well, we know everybody, we can do this, and we were right. We filled the room right, but we didn't know what we were doing business-wise. So we paid basically for grad school. Like, Rex was basically like grad school. Like, we lost money, but it was a tremendous education, and it sort of stamped us to the public as like, oh, these guys are guys we want to bet on.
I'm curious also, in reading a bunch of the articles and interviews with you, and knowing Tyler, I think it's so clear. I've known you just for a short while, but your love is so strong for him, and I'm wondering how being a father has changed you, maybe as a person, as a business, how you manage, work with family, and how that kind of changed your life.
Well, Ty is my guy. Like, there's nothing. I was in love with Tyler before he was born. I imagined I would always be a dad, and hoped that I would be so lucky as to have a son like Tyler. And he's far beyond what I imagined he would, I could ever be so proud as to have as a kid. And, it's funny, people through all stages of Lotus and other places all know Ty. It's very weird for him because, my desk was plastered with photos of him. I used to bring him up to the office when he was 2 and 3 and 4 years old. What's interesting about that is that, he can understand it now. I would never have told him when he was younger, but, when 2008 really crushed us, like, we had to sell almost all our places at a loss. We didn't really have a job, literally didn't really have a job. My dad was still alive, and he was encouraging me to interview for other fields. But I knew the Lambs Club was being built. It was under construction, and Jimmy was being built. And so I just kind of had to hold on as best I could waiting for them to open because I knew once they opened, we'd be back to good, or at least on the road to good. So the terrible news was we were really suffering financially, and of course you don't want to let that impact your family. And Nikki was working, my wife was working at the time, thankfully, and but Ty, what was good about it in a weird way was I got to spend a great deal of time at home with Ty at a really fun age. He was 7, 8, whatever, so I could go to PS 87 and shoot hoops for 2 hours and not worry that I wasn't at a meeting. So at a really crucial time in his life, I think, and a really great time to be a parent, I got to spend a really great extra amount of time with him. So in a weird way, that terrible period in New York from, let's call it end of 2007, early 2008 to 2010, when things sort of started to come back, crushed me financially, but allowed me to spend an amazing amount of time with Tyler. So it's definitely, well, it was hard in the early years of Lotus. It was very hard on my wife because Tyler was born almost exactly when Lotus opened. So my sleep schedule was completely fucked up, and I would get home at 4. I'd have to watch ESPN for an hour just to, come down, and then I needed to sleep till 11 or 12, and so it was really hard on Nikki to do everything, and she was amazing at it. But then also, again, I didn't have to go back to work necessarily right away, so I got to spend a little time with him at that time, and I'm just lucky. Look, I'm just lucky he's got a great moral compass and came out the way he did.
To wrap things up, what do you hope your legacy is in the long run? I mean, you hope, hopefully another long life, but
Yeah.
What do you hope when it's all said and done?
I think most important, I mean, there's definitely some things I'd like to check off the box that I can accomplish, that like this Hollywood thing has been frustrating because this story has been circulating in LA for a few years with a few different networks. And I'd like to see it get made, because whenever I tell the stories, people are kind of like, how is that not a movie? But at the end of the day, to answer your question more philosophically, I'd like to be, when it's all said and done, people to think I was decent. Our business relies on it's a people business. It's not like just inventing a product and then getting it out there. Like, every day is interacting with so many people. And to be honest, the thing that drives me the craziest right now about my job is that between the 4 places we have in New York, soon to be more, and then the 3 places that I consult on in the Venetian, I cannot remember. It's not like Lotus or Union Bar. I knew everyone's name. I knew their girlfriend's name and their wife's name, their mom, whatever. I hate walking into work and having someone say, "Hey, David," and I don't know their name. I mean, obviously I know them, but I cannot right now keep track, and it drives me insane, because I think that it takes a direct chunk of who I think I'd like to be as a person. I want to know who everyone is that works with us. I want to treat them with, as the respect they deserve. They work so hard for us. They all have their own dreams and their own goals, and I want to see them achieve those. And it drives me nuts that I walk into our place and someone that I've seen for a year says, "Hey, David, what's up?" And I'm like, "Oh shit," So I don't know. At the end of the day, if I was going to be really, think about that, I would like that the people that worked with us or encountered me or somehow said, at the end of the day, he was a good guy. So I hope.
Are there any, for the people to stand by and on waiting for the projects to be built? Do you want to give a little plug and let people know what they should be looking for in the next couple of months and years?
Sure. The ones that I could talk about right now that aren't, there's 2 or 3 that are like, I wouldn't say embargoed, that's overly fancy, but just they're with developers who aren't ready to announce yet. So I gotta be respectful of their own PR plan. But doing a high end, well, we're hoping it's going to be the Indochine of Indian food with a friend of mine named Manish Goyal, who's a tremendous guy in the marketing world, who's decided he wanted to open the approachable, cool, accessible version of Indian food. And we've got an amazing space next to Gramercy Tavern that should open, we think, around March. It's under construction now. And with that same group and with this amazing guy, named Sam Ross, who owns Attaboy down in the Lower East Side and is perennially ranked in the top 5 of the bars in the world. We're redoing a place called Temple Bar, right basically diagonally across from Kith on Lafayette and Bleecker. And then through with my Café Clover guys, we're doing a place called American Bar, which will be a restaurant featuring sort of all those classics that you love, but hopefully done at an elevated level on Greenwich Ave. And we're also doing the food and beverage for a place called The Well, which is basically like the Soho House of Wellness. It's a health and wellness. It's not really a spa; it's more a lifestyle venue. It's a private club on Union Square, and we're doing all their food and beverage. And lastly, we are going back full circle to our conversation when I was walking here, where we are doing something in Brooklyn near Nevin Street. There's just solidifying it, but there's a hotel that looks like it's going to get built with a small rooftop pool off the Nevin Street stop. They haven't named it yet, but so I will be coming out here a little bit, probably about 16 months from now.
Beautiful. Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on my show. I could listen. I
pleasure.
could listen to these Russia stories and hopefully many more. No, but it's truly been a pleasure, and we have some tennis to take care of. So when you come to Brooklyn in that time, we'll get
do
our
some
matches
tennis.
in.
And no one goes up 3-1 on me in ping pong and escapes. So I'm coming for you.
Thank you so much, David.
My pleasure.